Have you ever disliked a book so much that you revived a dead series on your YouTube channel? Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another episode of the best and worst of indie books. I genuinely thought this was dead on my channel. It was one of the first series I created way back in 2018 when I started, and I would basically be like, here's an indie book I've read recently that I really liked and another one that I really didn't like, because I couldn't come up with another framework. And eventually that caught the attention of indie authors who would then send me their work for review, and so the indie reviewing became the big thing on my channel. And honestly, I kind of just assumed that this would go to the wayside. I was actually having a really hard time finding and reading bad indie books because I don't purposefully do it. I don't seek them out. In fact, I DNF and I try to avoid them, and I stopped doing as many readathons that were normally the reason that I would actually read the books I didn't like, because I had to find the books that fit the prompt exactly. And I'm like, oh, I guess I'm just not gonna have any really, really bad indie books to talk about anymore. And then I found another book. So it's back. Now, before I would actually, while it was titled Best and Worst of Indie Books, I would actually start with the worst and end with the best. But because the worst is really what everyone's here for, and I'd like watch minutes, we're going to do it in the order of the title. Start with the best, end with the worst, and see where we go from there. For the best of, we have A Soul to Keep by Opal Reyne. If you can't tell from this cover, this is a monster romance all about a young woman named Rhea who has been declared by her village to be a bad omen. Demons killed her family, but not her, and so it's kind of assumed that she's somehow connected to it's never very clear exactly what the villagers believe, but they're highly superstitious because they live in a world with literal demons. And there also is a race of creatures called Dusk Walkers, and no one's quite sure what they do. They got cool skull for heads and glowing eyes. The creature design of the monsters in this books are just perfect. And this one specific Dustwalker always comes to the village and asks for a single person willingly going back to what is called the Vale with him, because he is lonely and wants a companion. And the village basically tells Rhea, you're going to go with this dude, or you're going to spend the rest of your life locked in a prison, because they're that scared of her. They don't want to kill her because they think that killing her will bring more bad omens or something, but they want her gone. So she's like, well, guess I'm screwed. Fine. Let's go. Right away, the thing I like about Rhea is she's angry, but very much that kind of righteous, why does the world do this to me kind of angry. And it leads into really well with the creature dynamics, because these Duskwalkers are so brilliantly done. I just love the creature design of these things. I don't know if they're based on an existing belief system or existing folklore. I low-key was doing some quick Googling just to make sure this wasn't a very recognizable indigenous creature that you're not supposed to talk about, that one that you're not supposed to talk about. My cursory Googling did not show anything, but if you know of something, let me know. But for my part, if this is an original creature, it's fantastically well done. Orpheus, our Duskwalker, suffers the same way that all Duskwalkers do, which is he has basically grown up from being very animalistic by eating humans. This is a very morally gray story. And he's very lonely, but the problem is that his animalistic senses can be turned on. So if he smells fear, large amounts of fear, it hits the switch, and suddenly he's more animalistic again. And you can tell this by his eyes. Well, they're kind of eyes. It's really just glowing orbs that hover in the socket of the skull. Again, I love the creature design. It's so monstrous. And if they turn red, bad news bears. Once he's in that state, it is very, very hard for him to walk out of it. And basically, he has accidentally killed a ton of these humans. But he keeps trying because he's, completely lonely. And Rhea basically survives by being more angry than afraid. and being pissed off at the world, but also having this kind of nihilistic, well, I don't care, my life has sucked kind of vibes that downplay her fear so that his animalistic urges aren't turned on. Now, that being said, this is definitely a book where if you have issues with those kind of moral things, you're probably going to struggle with this, because it is inherent in the mechanics of the Duskwalkers that the reason they became higher life forms was by directly eating humans. Now, you could argue that when they first started eating humans, they were just purely animals eating out of hunger. They weren't killing to be cruel. But it's definitely a morally gray aspect. But I liked it as a monster romance because it really delved into, this is a monster. This is not a human. He does not think like a human. And in some cases, she does have to start teaching him things like compassion and sympathy. And obviously, he doesn't want to eat anybody. He has sworn off eating humans. He doesn't want to hurt her, even though there are some moments where she occasionally turns on that animalistic side. And I really like the creation of the veil and the mechanics of the demons. It actually, if it had not been a monster romance, this could be a really effective horror novel, because the only way to keep demons out of his home in the veil is through a series of protections, both a salt circle, because demons, and protections that had to be rehung constantly, because once the herbs in them wither, they're no longer vital. So basically, there is a constant threat of, if rain comes and washes the salt circle away, if someone gets knocked out or is, hurt and needs to heal, they might forget to put up the new charms for that level of protection. There's a constant fear of, we have to keep doing these protective things or the demons will come in. But of course, you have the slow developing romance of the two, and then it did the thing that I'm so iffy on when romance novels do this, because if it's done really well, it hypes you up for the next book in the series. If it's done poorly, it makes it look like you're spending the time in your first book to market the sequel, and it can make the book feel cheap. Thankfully, this one did not do that. But this book does introduce a second Duskwalker eventually that because it's a series, will be a protagonist in a future book. But it does it in such a way that the other Duskwalker, or what they call a Mavka, basically is so stupid that he needs Orpheus and Rhea to teach him, because he wants a human of his own. He wants a companion. But he's so dumb. He basically needs to be made smarter. So it actually serves as his character development that he will need before he can have his own book. And I liked that aspect. It made his introduction of, well, clearly this is our next protagonist, but he's not just here to market the next book. His story really does start in this book. I really liked that aspect, and I'm looking forward to seeing more about the lore of the Duskwalkers, because as the book goes on, Orpheus doesn't actually know that much about himself, but he starts learning more, and Rhea starts uncovering things about his origins, and I really liked it in general. There was some great moments of tension. Of course, we're talking a monster fucker book. How was the sex scenes? Fantastic. Obviously, this is monster romance, this is monster erotica, so you already will probably need to have some level of comfort with not entirely human creatures in sex scenes. Yes, he is sentient, yes, he is human-like. It's not like, it does not read as bestiality, essentially. And I really liked it, but again, this is one of those books where if you really like this genre, you're probably really gonna like this book. If this is a genre you're still kind of scared of, maybe give it a pass. But I am really excited. I went through the back of the book. This book was published in June of 2022, this year. The sequel is going to be published in October of this year. That's not even a full 6 months between releases. Opal Reyne, you okay? You're sleeping, right? These are 500-page books. But I'm excited. I'm probably going to get it. It might go on my hyped release to come list, which is very small right now because I'm only just learning to develop that list. But I'm really excited for this one. I think it could be so good. on to the worst of indie books of my recent reads, and that is Twisted by Marla Meyers. This, I believe I originally downloaded from BookBub, had kept it on my e-library for the longest time. I'd been unhauling religiously, but I always kept this one because I liked the premise, and finally I'm like, I'm working on creating a ghost story, let's read this ghost story, and I should not have done that. But this is all about an elderly woman who moves into a new home after the death of her husband, and it's haunted. And the ghost is talking to her essentially through her Alexa. The author does not try to hide the origins because the name of the assistant is literally Alex. I'm like, you couldn't have given it any other name. But basically, creepy voice starts coming through the Alexa and other spooky things start happening. And right off the bat, this book has no sense of tension because it doesn't build at all. It's not like, oh, everything's fine for a hot minute and then some strange voices start coming through. No. Right out of the gate, it is creepy, I will cut off your fingers voice through the digital assistant and knives flying across the room within the first 30 pages. That's not good tension building in a ghost story. You gotta build up. You gotta start with some lower level creepy things and then move on to the full poltergeist stuff. But this book is very short. I thought it was 150 pages, only to find out at the end that it's only 120 because the last 30 pages was just excerpts from the next book. I get so frustrated when indie books do that. Don't make a full, sixth of the runtime of the book be marketing. But anyway, the biggest thing that I have for this, and it is very common in my worst of indie books, is I thought this book was supposed to be slightly kind of more lighthearted based on a review on the cover that said something to the effect of a ghost story that bites back with humor. So I thought, okay, we're going to get something a little bit sillier, maybe like a dark comedy type thing. No, there's nothing funny in this. It's not saying anything. It's not a dark comedy at all. In fact, it has a ton of really dark moments that it doesn't seem to realize are dark. And I'm not sure why. And it races right into them. Right there. The biggest one being there is a highly graphic, tons of trigger warnings here, sexual assault scene in the middle of the book. Very highly detailed. There's no point to it, really. I think it was supposed to be a red herring at one point for the ghost, but it didn't need to happen and it didn't really make any sense. It actually, at the end, when things are revealed, makes the ghost's motivations muddier than anything else. And then at one point there is a trigger warnings again, suicide attempt that doesn't really nail down, it races into it again. Basically the ghost, and I'm spoiling things here, but it's kind of hard to talk about how much I was struggling with this book without spoiling it. Basically the elderly woman is falling in love with the ghost, and the ghost essentially says, kill yourself to be with me. And one conversation, she's immediately there. And I'm like, you've known this ghost for, I think, a couple weeks at this point. And yes, she's semi-lonely after the death of her husband, but she had no other ideations. She was very happy to have her own home. She was very happy to try and live on her own for the first time in her life. And then suddenly, one conversation after 2 weeks, she's immediately attempting suicide. And it's that's not how that works. As someone who is trained to recognize ideation and how to see the signs and prevent it and all of that, you don't just go from perfectly fine to immediate attempt right out of the gate because of you. No. This is an elderly woman that raised kids and was married and has seasoning, has experienced. How was she that easily tricked that quickly? It is not a completed suicide attempt if you're worried. But it's just races into these horrific things without dwelling on them, but also there's no twisted comedy in it either, because you can make the argument for black comedy and how it can make some things easier to digest through humor, but it doesn't have that. I honestly do not know where the word humor on the cover of this book came from. There's nothing funny about this. And in general, this book also screamed purity culture at me, which as a former pastor's kid, that gets my fight or flight going. Basically, after the daughter is nearly raped, the mother is like, makes a point of being, oh, well, at least she's still a virgin. That's what she's focused on. It's a good thing her daughter's still a virgin. And I was like, are you kidding me? And there's also other side things, like they're having some very stereotypical marital problems, the elderly woman's daughter and her husband, that are all resolved real quick. And then came the reveal of the ghost's motivations, why he did what he did. And they were, in a word, inane, stupid, pointless. I did not get the reveal at all. I'm not going to say exactly what it is because some of you might still want to read it. I know other people like hate reading. I don't. I honestly thought, oh, this book has a purpose because, again, remember, I thought this book had 30 extra pages on the end that it didn't have. So I'm like, oh, there's still time to wrap this up. And then it didn't. I could make a whole rant video on how much I hate that indie authors that do the, let me put 30 pages of excerpt for the next book on this 100-page novella. I dislike that so much. But regardless, this book could have been a really cool concept. It showed a lot of reasons why Stella, the protagonist, would have been an unreliable narrator because she is elderly. So of course, if her mind starts going, everyone would just be like, oh, dementia, Alzheimer's, whatever. She also had a really big reason to not want to leave the house because it was literally the first house she'd ever lived in. So it had like good bones in like the first 15 pages, and then it lost all of that by going way too fast, rushing into all of these horrific things because ghost story bad things, and explaining all of them poorly. And then, oddly enough, the sequel to this, because there is a sequel, revolves around the ghost, which, in theory, could be cool, but also, he's the villain of the story, so you'd have to like villains. He's very obviously villainous, and in general, I was just dissatisfied with everything, and I'm like, I should have unhauled this with everything else. I should have seen. In general, I'm just coming to realize that I just prefer longer books at this point. I won't usually buy an ebook, if I notice that it's under 200 pages. I won't even touch it because I've just learned about myself. I like longer character arcs, longer slow burn romances, longer tension, and I think if I had seen this in BookBub now, I wouldn't have downloaded it. But at least it's still off my own TBR, so I still got that going for me. But it was a 1-star. The first 1-star I have read all year. I don't even remember if I read a 1-star last year. Like I said, I've gotten a lot better at avoiding those books, and 2-star is usually the lowest I'll go for anything. So I don't foresee another episode of this, but you never know. Thank you so much, if you're still watching, for listening to my rambling. I forgot how much fun it is to do this series where I'm just like, this book really good, this book really bad. I don't foresee, like I mentioned before, me doing a lot more of these videos, at least anytime soon, because I don't hate read. I don't usually rant review, so I don't seek out books that I'm going to dislike. I try in everything to make every book I read at least a 4 or 5-star rating, as far as I can tell from the marketing and such. But you never know. I probably will stumble across other books that I dislike. But what about you? Are there any books lately that you have read that were either really, really hyped or really, really hated? Let me know about them in the comments below. I also know that I actually have some mutuals online who were interested in A Soul to Keep. So if you like my review of it, my glowing review of it, and you're interested in buying the book now, please let me know. I'd love to have other people to gush about it with, because I really did love it so much. It was over 500 pages, and I read it in 2 days because I just didn't want to stop reading, and I love that. But thank you so much for watching, and with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.